I got a very broad charge about tonight's speech, so I decided I would just try to talk from the heart about my passions, or some of them anyway. Sarah, I do pick up on your thought and open my remarks with the following thought for your consideration. Regret for what you have done is tempered by time. Regret for what you have not done is inconsolable. I want to meet you where you are this evening. And since I know that at least some of you are in sponge mode, meaning I'm about to leave this place and what can I soak up, I'll try to give you some insights about entrepreneurship and some other subjects. May I start with a question, what matters? Since I know only in a general sense what each of you cares about, I trust that in offering some of my personal thoughts, a few of them may resonate with some of you and help you in your thinking as you look ahead. I decided to focus on what I think constitutes meaning in one's professional life. So I leave such personal subjects as the centrality of nurturing and being in a loving relationship for another forum. I've developed several needs that I think together constitute what matters to me. Though I don't come from a particularly advantaged childhood in a material sense, I was blessed with parents and grandparents who constantly espoused basic values of ethical behavior and fair dealing. And from them, my first need has become to act in a responsible way, to be ethical in my dealings with people, and to really stand for something. Though I have fallen short on many occasions and continue to do so, I still strive toward the mark for the prize of high calling. I've always had a need as well to push my capabilities, to grow not only intellectually but in the exercise of good judgment. Like most of us, I also seek recognition from my peers and from others who matter. Next, as I was able to move into management positions, I developed a strong desire to teach and to inspire those who worked with and for me. That fundamental need to give back, although put on the back burner for many years as I strove to carve out a career, did resurface in spades. And finally, the need for professional freedom. That is, having some time and some resources to be able to choose where to apply one's energies. I love the following phrase, whose author I do not know. Work like you don't need the money. Love like you've never been hurt. And dance like nobody's watching. I'll try to touch on these various needs as I talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and then move on to some more general topics. These are indeed extraordinary times. The recent downturn notwithstanding, the buoyant U.S. economy has created a sense of prosperity that has touched every segment of the working population. As most of you know, in the heavy manufacturing sector, there has been a net loss of jobs over the past 25 years. Yet our economy is generally vibrant, less so in the last 18 months, of course, and new jobs are being created every year. Those jobs largely arise from entrepreneurial efforts. They arise because individuals had visions, and they pursued those visions. And people in the marketplace were willing to buy the products and services flowing from those visions. Yet, most of us feel we're destined to become observers, highly paid corporate managers, sitting just outside this wave of entrepreneurialism. Many of us have hoped that someday we might become entrepreneurs, yet statistically, most GSB graduates do not become entrepreneurs. Fewer than 25% of our graduates, 25 years out, according to the data we have, classify themselves as having undertaken something entrepreneurial or been self-employed. Yet some 90% of entering first-year MBAs express a strong interest in owning their own businesses. What happens to derail these ambitions? Well, reality intervenes. How can I worry about being my own boss? I'm concerned with getting a good job these days, having a life of some kind, and paying off the huge student loans I'm behind. I understand. Believe me, I understand. I offer for your consideration two of my very favorite quotes. They describe sharply contrasting attitudes which are likely to lead one into very different careers and indeed lives. The first is from T.S. Eliot's classic Proof Rock. No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Am an attendant lord, one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two, advise the prince. No doubt an easy tool, deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious, and meticulous, full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse. At times, indeed, almost ridiculous, almost at times the fool. I grow old. I grow old. I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach? I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker. And in short, I was afraid. End quote. Penetrating words indeed. An attendant lord advising the prince. Deferential, politic, cautious, meticulous, glad to be of use, afraid. A sad portrayal indeed. In contrast, hear these words of W.H. Murray, which I've quoted in my class. He is the man who led the Scottish Himalayan expedition. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have happened. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance which no man could have dreamt would have come his way. I have learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets. Whatever you can do, or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. End quote. So perhaps it's time for some questions. A good one might be, as I near the end of my MBA experience, how would I become an entrepreneur if I wanted to? Are they born like 300 hitters in baseball? Can they be made? Well, before we talk about characteristics of entrepreneurs, I'd like to identify one thing that you should not bring if you aspire to own your own business. Don't bring capital. Don't bring money, you say? How can capital be anything other than an advantage to a would-be entrepreneur? Well, one of the things that we teach is that the functions of the entrepreneur and the capital supplier are very different. Nowhere is it written that the entrepreneur needs to supply capital. The disadvantage of having capital is that one tends to define the scope of one's venture according to the size of one's pocketbook. Now, our working definition of entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity without regard to the resources currently controlled. Now, if you think you might want to own your own company, match your outlook with 5 attitudes that we've observed in most entrepreneurs. 1, an unending dissatisfaction with the status quo. And that has 2 elements. You're not happy with the status quo, your status quo, and you think you can do something better. You think you can do something better than it is now being done. And find a better place to sow your seeds. 2, a healthy self-confidence, a willingness to be lonely, to make tough decisions, to stand on a level of the organization chart with no peers, and to have the buck stop with you. 3, what I would call responsible competence, that you feel good at what you do, that you think you can do more, and you're willing to stretch. 4, a concern for detail. There are very few successful entrepreneurs I have ever seen who are broad-brush people in all aspects of their professional life. They may be broad-brush in some areas, but in matters that are critical to success, they are meticulous. And if they are not meticulous by nature, they're astute enough to find a partner who is, so that if they cut the grass, somebody will pick up the clippings. 5, and finally, perhaps most importantly, a tolerance for ambiguity. That should not be confused with a love of risk, because the best entrepreneurs I know are constantly asking themselves how to shrink risk out of a situation. It does mean a willingness to accept an uncertain future. You're not sure that you have a job tomorrow. You're not sure that you have an income tomorrow. And you're willing to give up the corporate environment which you know, the peer group with which you feel reasonably comfortable, the customer base, the daily routines, and you'll take on the ambiguity of attempting to establish in the marketplace your vision of a venture. Okay, you've matched up your attitudes with those that I've just described, and you pass. Maybe not a perfect match, but pretty good. How would you begin to become an entrepreneur? How does one get from here to there? From employment to self-employment? I don't have an idea, you say. I don't have money, which you've told me is an advantage. And I just don't know how or where to start. I have to pay off my debts. I have, or I hope to soon have, family obligations. Well, don't be afraid to take a big step if one is indicated. You can't cross a chasm in 2 jumps. There is only one basic requirement in terms of the process. That is, to figure out how to buy yourself some time, to be able to establish yourself apart from your present job so that, so that you can use the morning of your energies on your new venture. Because if you're going to work full-time and have family responsibilities and want to have any life outside your professional endeavors, you're only going to be able to give the evening of your energies to your new venture if you remain employed. And new ventures demand morning efforts, first-class enthusiasm, alertness. So you need to be able to leave your present position and live for some period of time while you translate your dream into reality. We think of entrepreneurship not just as starting companies or buying companies or managing growing companies or intrapreneurship or being aggressive and creative in managing nonprofits. Rather, we think that the important differences between an entrepreneur and a trustee or an administrator are attitudinal. That the entrepreneur is opportunity-driven, the administrator tends to be resource-driven, saying, these are the resources, these are the assets under my trusteeship, I should protect them. We believe that the entrepreneur is willing to rent resources, while the administrator wants to own them, has to own them. We think that a dissatisfaction with the status quo is often what impels an entrepreneur, where the administrator, even a forward-looking one, is often thinking in terms of evolutionary developments, of how he or she can improve the current situation at the margin. I hold firmly the belief that entrepreneurship is a reasonable career alternative. Not for all, but for any single person who might choose it. You don't need to be impulsive, headstrong, bombastic, or flamboyant. You don't need to check your analytical skills at the door. You need no operating experience, though it usually helps. To be an entrepreneur, there are no external barriers, only those we internally impose. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that things are difficult. Those words from Seneca. JFK reminded us of the same thought in different words. We should not let our fears hold us back from pursuing our hopes. A principal issue for you in charting your career path is, will I be in someone else's company or companies or in my own? It's as basic as that. In this decision, our greatest foes, whom we must chiefly combat, are within. Let's examine for a moment the risks of employment. You know, we're always examining the risks of going out on our own, and they look formidable. But let's think about the risks we run by not going out on our own. While the company that employs you will hopefully challenge you, promote you, pay you well, flatter you, give you increasing numbers of buttons to push and people to manage, it may also, if you're lucky, acclimate you to its culture, envelop you and consume your entrepreneurial energies, perspective, and risk capacity. And I say perversely, if you're lucky, because if you choose that path, you want to be wrapped up in it. That's the only way you will do the best possible job. What a paradox. Many, although certainly not all, larger company executives, I submit, are anything but free. How many of them would love to leave, but don't know how to, don't know where to go, can't afford it, and in many cases don't dare to? I've rarely met an unhappy, successful entrepreneur, but I've met many unhappy, successful executives of large companies and partners of consulting and banking firms. I submit that your career should not only be fun, it should serve your life. In effect, we've just described a few of the risks of not following the entrepreneurial path. Tilling their soil in their many locations, creating further value for their shareholders, and when asked, you move or you move on. Indeed, someone else's company versus your own is more than a matter of how you will spend your work days. It will reverberate to every facet of your life. And yet the decision to become an entrepreneur is made even more difficult, because each of you labors under the burden of high expectations, of close friends, of family, of yourselves. And with each success in your career, there are more chips on the table. With each victory come greater expectations. And in order not to disappoint others or oneself, a safer, more customary, lower risk career course is often charted. But now we see that there is no absolute safety, that risk cannot be avoided. Or as Clint Eastwood said in the movie The Rookie, you want a guarantee? Buy a toaster. We see that now there is no right career choice as there has been in the past. It was easy to choose a college or university from the attractive alternatives that each of you had. It was easy to choose a job. It was easy to choose a business school from among the most prestigious. But now, there's no right choice. There's no low-risk choice. There's no proper choice. Most of us realize this fact intellectually, but we find it very hard to accept emotionally. Certain risks, in fact, must be assumed, as mentioned, consciously or not. And thus the operable question becomes, what set of risks can I best control? One of the reasons I didn't go into academia, there were a number. I didn't think I'd be good at pure research. I needed to make more money. But one of the really compelling risks for me was that I perceived it to be an environment with strong political overtones. And that equated to me, even at that point in time, I happened to think in this way, that equated to me to a set of risks I couldn't control. It's really hard to evaluate pure research. And there's a strong political element among tenure within the academy. I don't mean to demean anything at all. I'm just speaking from the heart. I start with the premise that one of our goals in life should be to die young as late as possible. Therefore, what are some of the important questions to be asking oneself if the door to an entrepreneurial career is to be left open? 1, how would I define my ideal work environment in terms of partners, ambiguity, risks, peers, status, power, smaller versus larger work environment, structured versus unstructured, the importance of money. 2, what skills of mine need supplementing? And 2A, do I think of supplementing these skills by recruiting a partner or by making myself more ready to go it alone? Good question there. 3, regarding the jobs now offered or potentially available to me, let's take a look at the daily routine I would follow, the avenues of advancement, the availability of a mentor, and 2 very important things. What doors are opened or closed in my career path by assuming this job? In other words, what are the natural transitions out of this job, and what are the more awkward transitions? And secondly, in this job, how hard will it be for me to keep my perspective, to keep my career goal in mind and nurture it and move toward it? I've learned that the easier a change is to make, the less it usually matters, and that the older we get, the harder it is to choose change, which makes it even more necessary to do so from time to time. Change is a form of hope. To risk change is to believe in tomorrow. And hope is a gift we need. So I feel it behooves us to set a course whereby each job change we make, however difficult, moves us closer to our career objective. But the path must be visualized in advance. Now back to the question of how to get from here to there. Well, the most difficult part of the task, as Plato once said, quote, is the beginning of the work, end quote. And that means beginning the search and sustaining the search for one's entrepreneurial venture, be it a startup or a buyout. And maintaining a search is like, in some respects, like maintaining religious beliefs. They die if they're not nurtured. If you don't freshen that search mentality by reading, by staying in touch with other aspiring entrepreneurs and those who are actually entrepreneuring, atrophy will set in. And the quest for one's venture will soon be abandoned as that naive idea I had back when I was at the GSB. How does one prepare for an entrepreneurial career? Well, there are alternative approaches. 1, industry-specific experience. If you have a clear idea what industry you want to go into, which is rare, but sometimes happens. 2, general management experience. Operating experience or line experience is desirable. And I feel that such supervisory skills are broadly transferable. Managing others is the key here. Doing it on someone else's nickel before you do it on your own because there's a learning curve. 3, assuming a sentry position, where one can see the world of deal opportunities going by. That is, being at the intersection of opportunities, capital, and management. Some examples of sentry positions would be small business consulting, bank workout departments, working for a small regional investment bank or a small venture capital or LBO firm, even a CPA firm whose clients are primarily smaller businesses. And the above three approaches are not necessarily mutually exclusive. But one of the really important bywords is don't spend 5 years getting 2 years experience. Though you're eager to leave Stanford now to get going, at least part of you is, you'll never again have a comparable chance to reflect and to set goals, working goals, as you'll have in the next 6 weeks. Don't allow the urgent to preempt the important in your daily lives. Set aside time to think about what's important. Use those goals. Move toward them on a daily and weekly basis. Modify them as needed. Compare your progress against them from time to time. And remember, choose carefully, because with the talent each of you has, whatever you really want, you'll probably get. The next few years are key. You require alternatives to be in a strong position to make good decisions. And it's helpful to look at a lot of opportunities in order to refine your judgment. What are the risks of the entrepreneurial path? You won't eat? No, that's really not a risk. You can figure out a way to eat. Failure? Perhaps. But in the event of failure, do you lose your reputation? I certainly hope not. There's no need to. Do you lose your own money? Nope. Do you lose other people's money? Yep. But they are risk investors. So that's okay. They expect to have some losses. A company won't hire you after a failure? Wrong. The biggest risk is that you may become constitutionally unemployable. You may decide that you can't work for anyone else. Yet you failed in your own venture, so you may have to go back and reestablish your credentials working for somebody else, as unappealing as it is, in order to try again. I want to take just a moment to talk about a phenomenon that has arisen in fairly recent years, the so-called search fund, with which many of you are familiar, some are not. Back in the mid-'80s, there were 2 or 3 individuals who, upon receiving their MBAs, got a small group of backers to support them in looking for a company to buy. And as it happened, those 2 or 3 individuals were successful both in getting backers and buying companies. And I think by 1990, there were only 3 or 4 or 5 out there who had done this. However, that so-called search fund model, getting funded to look around for a company to buy, has gained a head of steam to the point where something well over 35 individuals or pairs of recent MBAs have raised funds of several $100,000 apiece immediately or soon after graduation, and most of them, but not all, have bought companies. There are still a few of them who have raised search funds and have not bought companies. There have been a few others who failed to find a company to buy and had to go back and get a job. But the vast majority have succeeded, some dramatically. So there is a small but rather extraordinary record that is being compiled. It doesn't represent a sample of substantial enough size to be statistically significant, But it's anecdotally interesting because these individuals did not have any operating experience at all, with only a few exceptions. Generally did not. They'd never run anything. They'd never managed anyone. The idea was to look for a company that was simple, that did not have a big product development cycle, or a big technology component, or a big style component, did not have multiple locations, was profitable at the time it was acquired, was of a reasonable size, that is, say, 5 to 20 million in sales, and it would be financed conservatively, and a board of directors would be assembled that could be active advisors for the entrepreneur. So the concept was to make up for that lack of operating experience of the individual MBA graduate by finding the profitable company, financing it conservatively with a strong board of advisors. In other words, the image is, here's an existing horse going around the track with a jockey on it. That's the successful company now making money. And we're simply going to change jockeys and put the MBA on the horse to replace the selling owner with the instructions for the first 12 to 18 months, just try not to let the horse fall down or bump into the railings. And then when he or she, the new MBA CEO, has a little bit of operating experience and familiarity with the business, then start making changes. It's become quite an interesting phenomenon, one that I've supported, and as you can tell, I'm enthusiastic about. I think it bears watching because it's the most direct way that I know of for aspiring MBA entrepreneurs to get into business for themselves without taking several years in grade to get operating experience that we heretofore thought they needed. Very important in this effort have been different groups of our alumni and others as well, of course, but these people have often mentored our MBAs as friends, investors, board members, informal advisors. And now that there are well over 35 search funders out there, there are those who have gone earlier in the process are turning to advising and helping those who are coming along after them, so that we hope the model becomes self-perpetuating. And really our objectives are not only self-perpetuation, but to have the search fund model grow and flourish as one wave helps another wave behind it. When are you ready to chart the entrepreneurial path? Well, Maxwell Maltz, in his tome, which is really a wonderful book called Psycho-Cybernetics, said that, quote, "You're ready to do something when you can visualize yourself doing it." But there's a relatively short time window. It's somewhere between your age now and your mid-30s, say. It's sooner rather than later. In percentage terms, not many entrepreneurs start or buy their first ventures after the age of 40, and the vast majority, 85% in a study I saw not too long ago, the vast majority of first-time entrepreneurs are pre-35. Remember that entrepreneurs are just like you and me in ability. What they have that is distinctive is vision and conviction. Remember, too, that warm sense of everything going well in your career may only be the body temperature at the center of the herd. What are the rewards of the entrepreneurial path? At the top of my list would be freedom, to stretch my capabilities, to put my imprimatur on a company, to create something, to have an ethical impact on others, and to have financial independence. Now I know that it is unfashionable, even déclassé, to talk about money within the academy. Money is a byproduct, we all say, with our noses firmly in the air. We do well, we'll be paid. Well, here's a comment about money that I offer without apology. There's a big difference between being rich and being wealthy. Being rich is having money. Being wealthy is having money and time. The fundamental difference between income and capital. Financial independence when you're young enough to enjoy it may be something worth working for. It gives you an opportunity to have a second career and a third career, and to be psychologically able to set out in a new direction. And thus, if you stay with a successful business you've created, you do it out of choice, not necessity. It helps as a prospective entrepreneur to have the ability to read people and within reason to predict behavior. It's important to cover the critical skills of the business that you're going into, the value drivers, either alone or with a partner. It helps to have an experienced deal lawyer at your side. It's essential to maintain one's reputation and the highest standards of behavior, because, as you well know, it takes years to build a reputation. But only a trice, only one act to lose it. And once you tell a lie, everything else you ever say to that person is brought into question. It's also important to control your anger, to speak more softly and slowly as you get more upset. It's desirable to minimize your enemies, because burning bridges is only an indulgence. And bring along a healthy respect for others, all others. One of the memories I have of high school is a 10th grade algebra class. And we sat down to a test. And the class was working through the test, as was I. We got to the last question of the test. It was about a 40-minute test. And the last question itself was worth 20% of the whole test. And the woman who taught the class had asked as that question, "What is the name of the janitor who cleans the room?" None of us knew the answer. It was December. We'd been there 3 months. None of us knew the answer. We saw this janitor every day. We didn't have the respect to speak to him and learn his name. There's a confluence of the ethical and the practical in life. So I ask you to resolve to take the high road. And in your quest, pause now and then to ease the burdens of your fellow travelers. You know, it's been said that we all go through life with partly broken hearts. Any definition of a successful life must include service to others. We've all drunk from wells we didn't dig. I reject the prevailing notion that the pursuit of selfishness has overtaken the possibility of compassion, and I ask you to reject it as well. Not just by giving a few $100s to your local charity or taking a titular position on the hospital board, but by devoting your time and your skills to something worthwhile. To really pull on the oars and make a difference in areas where you are qualified to do so. Hear the evocative words of the magnificent 17th century metaphysical poet George Herbert in his brief piece entitled Virtue. Sweet day, so cool, so calm, so bright. The bridal of the earth and sky, the dew shall weep thy fall tonight, for thou must die. Sweet rose, whose hue angry and brave bids the rash gazer wipe his eye, thy root is ever in its grave, and thou must die. Sweet spring, full of sweet days and roses, a box where sweets compacted lie, my music shows ye have your closes, and all must die. Only a sweet and virtuous soul, like seasoned timber, never gives. But though the whole world turn to coal, then chiefly lives. At the end of my days, I do not want the devil, the footman, to snicker and hold my coat. If I have led well and stood for something, I think I won't have to worry. You know, at this school, we teach you lots of things we know you'll soon forget, because we don't know how to teach you what you'll always need to know. Compassion, commitment, concern, involvement, and love. I submit that the saddest phrase of middle age is, I wish I had. How much better to be able to say, with open eyes I have dared and cherished no regrets. It's undeniably tougher to create your own opportunity than to be part of someone else's. But I've been down the entrepreneurial road, and it offers unparalleled exhilaration. If you choose to take that road, ignore the naysayers, because very likely your only supporters will be other entrepreneurs and those with blind faith in you. So do it if you will. My confidence is in your minds and in your imaginations and in your convictions. And finally, these words of Robert Frost, which my students have heard before. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. End quote. Thank you.